we turn the webcast back on, please? It's on, thank you. Mic 22.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This presentation is an opportunity for me to present a very early draft discussion on a discussion paper that I've been asked to write on co-governance decision-making. And this is a project I've been working on only for a few months. We finalized the arrangements early on, late spring, early summer. So I've been trying to take a look at different cases and see what sort of discussion points I can bring to this organization. My very early findings so far are several, and I would say that there are a multitude of ways to design co-governance arrangements. And looking from a global perspective, I'm just going to, again, hit the highlights and then go back and explain and end up on these same conclusion points again. First of all, in terms of structure, co-governance can be indigenous state, it can be indigenous, or it could be a form of indigenous alliance with the state. These can be established either by a statutory entity, by a mutual agreement, or occasionally by a charitable trust. And then most importantly, from my perspective, they can either be a state nested system, and I'll explain what I mean by that, or a new joint organization created to do co-governance. And then I'm highlighting so far what I see as some of the key areas to success, defining that very broadly. Building effective relationships among partners, shared understanding of the purpose of the partnership, clear roles and responsibilities of each partner, including how decision-making is to be made, and then also transparency between partners. So working through it a bit, the purpose of this paper and this project is to assist First Nations in developing their own positions on shared decision-making models, and then to outline some of the scope of institutional mechanisms that are used around the world that are capable of recognizing Indigenous nations as rights and title holders. And then also to provide a foundation, hopefully for First Nations to adapt institutional mechanisms for their own unique circumstances and lived experiences here in BC. And what I've been doing is a global comparative analysis, and I have so far looked at 11 cases across 4 continents, and you can see them listed there. I'm not going to read them out, but we are looking at cases from Australia, New Zealand, North and South America, and then also the Sami area of northern Scandinavia. And on these slides, I'm going to move very quickly just to highlight some of the particular articles in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that lay the framework for co-governance arrangements. And on this slide, I walk us through some definitions of the difference between co-management and co-governance, which I think are important points to keep in mind. Co-management is a collaborative process of decision-making and problem-solving, often with the administration of some sort of a conservation policy. Co-governance, on the other hand, can go much further. This can be arrangements in which the ultimate decision-making authority resides with a new body, a particular collaborative body, with its own set of powers and responsibilities. So the critical questions that I have examined across the world are, how can we structure co-governance arrangements? Who's responsible for what components? How can we ensure that Indigenous legal orders are respected and Indigenous knowledge in the structure, along with some Western scientific knowledge, particularly in natural resources areas, and then also how to fund them. And in my cases, I have found that the variation that we see around the world are primarily in natural resources cases, so whether that's land, water, fisheries, and so on, but there are also elements of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous governance that are brought in, and those are the ones I particularly want to take a look at. And in terms of the different arrangements of stakeholders, I have the different cases listed out here by the style. So indigenous state arrangements seem to be the large number of them. They're in the first column. Indigenous to indigenous arrangements, which involve setting up a new organization to assist in the co-governance, and then indigenous alliance and state, which we see in a few cases. And then we can see a variety of mechanisms to establish co-governance. So a statutory entity, so whether that's an act of parliament or in the case of New Zealand, a treaty settlement, which is then ratified by the parliament, is one way to set them up. Secondly is a signed agreement of some kind, sometimes an MOU, sometimes called a treaty. And then thirdly is the creation of a charitable trust or a nonprofit organization. And we see two dominant institutional models for co-governance. So the state nested system, where the new indigenous institution or indigenous alliance is nested within state authority. And here we see a number of cases like the Finnmark County in northern Norway, indigenous protected areas of Australia, indigenous autonomies in Bolivia, and then the Macuria National Park in Colombia. Alternatively, we have joint organization structures where the state or the province and the indigenous nation or the indigenous nation alliance enter into a new joint organization creation in order to manage the co-governance. So these are some of the cases we're seeing with this structure: the Blackfoot Nation Water Compact, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, Mildren, which is a Murray Lower Darling River Indigenous Nations Network, and then also the fairly new conception of legal personhood in New Zealand. And I know I have limited time, so I just want to highlight two particular examples of joint organization that I find interesting and instructive for this case, the cases here in British Columbia. Mildren, which is the Murray Lower Darling River Indigenous Nations organization, was initiated by the Indigenous nations there. It's now a group of 25 nations that have joined into this organization, and they focus on the cooperation between the nations and maintaining traditional owners and respecting traditional ownership of that river basin. They've set up a particular nonprofit organization which then holds the water title as consolidated collective and grounded in traditional authority. The full delegation, and I think this is interesting, each nation sends 2 delegates to the group, 1 male and 1 female, because in Australia the male and female spheres are important but work together. So the group meets 2 times a year, but each nation, those 2 delegates get only 1 vote. So they have to agree as the 2 delegates in order and have consensus in order to bring it forward in 1 vote. On the other side of the Tasman, we have a fairly new construction of New Zealand legal personhood. And we have seen 3 instances of those so far. We have the Whanganui River, the Te Urewera Park, and now most recently last year, Mount Taranaki. These were indigenous initiated, but they were formalized through the process of treaty settlements and then an act of parliament, although the Mount Taranaki Act has not passed yet. How this is constructed is it's set up as a guardianship. So there is a board appointed to act as a guardian for these particular legal persons that are being created. So in Te Urewera, there's an 8-member board, 4 from the iwi, or the tribal groups, and then 4 from the government, although it was recently changed to 6 iwi and 3 government, so that the Maori voice is twice as strong on that board as the government. In Whanganui River, there are 2 guardians, 1 from the iwi and then 1 from the government. And in any act, this group must consider the iwi's culture and traditional law and knowledge on all of its decision-making when it comes to acting as a guardian for these cases. So I just want to wrap up again here. There are multiple ways to structure co-governance that I've seen so far, and there are a particular set of keys to success, and I think there are a few cases that are particularly instructive and helpful for us here in the British Columbia context. Again, this is a working draft, so I look forward to feedback and suggestions on how to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just checking with staff during the presentation, this is the first time anybody's receiving this. It's a part of a research project the union is undertaking. So maybe take the information for consideration now. If anything comes to mind, maybe flag it with Cheryl while she's here. Cheryl will be providing a report before February, and there will be a resolution on this topic at our February's Chiefs Council meeting, which then we may have to strike a working group or some way to include more chiefs conversation in what to do with the report. Is that safe to say, Cheryl?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So only due to time, let's take that as information for now, and it will be an ongoing topic. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes, and I'm happy to take feedback directly at cheryl.lightfoot@ubc.ca.
Maybe we can post that on screen sometime
Yes.
today.
So I'd be
Good.
happy to take in any comments.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. So with that, inviting forward Ardith Welcome for an update on UBCIC bylaws. Mic 22.
Good morning. I'm Well Petco Wydelks. Welcome. I'm a member of the Tlakatmik Nation, but I happen to have been born in Kamloops. So in some ways, this is a little bit like a return to beginnings to be talking here today. I'm giving an update today, and I've asked Andrea to join me because she's been working on behalf of the union on the Constitution Committee. And one of the things that we were tasked with in response to the Society Act changes was to both update our Constitution and bylaws and then to think through other areas that maybe we'd want to change. So we're passing out a memo that suggests change in 10 areas. And I think this is a really important time because we're commemorating 50 years of the Union of Chiefs in the building in front of where the iconic picture was taken. And sometimes I think bylaws can seem boring, but it's where so many of the important details about how an organization is operated can be found. For example, they become increasingly important during elections or when there's an issue of conflict. So we're suggesting changes in 10 areas. Some of those changes are actual changes to the bylaws, and some of them are a recommendation, maybe that we don't change the bylaws, but that we develop a policy. So for example, beefing up the policy around conflict of interest. So I want to go through these, and what we propose to do is if there's agreement on these, we will draft the proposed amendments. But because bylaws are so important, we wanted to take the chance to hear back from people. So the first area of suggestion is really just a cleanup amendment, and this is the Society Act says that the bylaws must provide a procedure for members to be admitted. Currently, our bylaw says that all bands in the province are entitled to be members, to be full members, but they become active members when they pay membership dues. So what the proposed amendment there would just be to clarify that. The second area is a cleanup amendment. So right now, the bylaws in essence say that the representative of a community to the Union of Chiefs will be the elected chief of a community, and that member, that they will represent their community for as long as they're the elected chief. What sometimes happens is that communities don't want to be represented by the elected chief. They want to appoint someone else to act in that person's place. The bylaws right now say that for that to happen, the registered adult members of a band should appoint a replacement. The recommendation is that a change be made to allow the band to appoint an alternate member by passing a resolution of their council with the support of the person otherwise entitled to be the member, that is the chief. The rationale for this proposed change is that's the practice already. The union has never actually went to a community and said, show us that you had a vote of all your adult members. So practically speaking, that's not happening, and it's a proposed amendment to catch what the bylaws say up with what the lived practice has been for decades. Third area of change is that the Society Act from here out will allow societies to have meetings electronically. So for example, by Skype, by teleconference, by video conference. And if a society does not want to allow that, they should say so. And the committee discussed this, and this was one area of agreement. The recommendation is that the union not allow electronic meetings for Chiefs Council, AGAs, or special assemblies. The rationale being that the in-person meetings and dialogue that happen are at the heart of UBCIC's deliberative process and should be protected. If, however, committees or executive meetings were to occur electronically, it was, as is already the practice, it was felt that that was acceptable. So the fourth area, and this is something that's really important in terms of the actual operation of the organization, and yet strangely isn't covered. So under the bylaws right now, proxy voting is only addressed in one instance. It's only addressed very specifically for the election of the president. It's not addressed for the election of other executive members, for attendance at Chiefs Council, for general attendance at any meetings. So the bylaws are silent here. What the recommendation is that this should be addressed, because if people do want to appoint a proxy, we do have a process in place that the union has operated again for decades, but it should be something that members can look to. And here's what the suggestions are, and we'd be interested in hearing back from you about this. But to appoint a proxy, the recommendation is that it be signed by the person who's doing the appointing, or it could be done by way of a BCR. And it could go to any person chosen by the member without restriction. So that might be something that you want to discuss, if you want to restrict that proxy to being only someone else who's a member of one of the communities who's a member of the union, or so forth. A person is not eligible to hold more than one proxy. Proxy cannot be proxied. And a proxy form must be received by UBCIC by the close of registration or by the close of creation of a voters list for an election. And the proxy is only valid for the duration of the meeting for which it is issued. This again is an important point, because sometimes during elections, proxies will come in while the election is occurring, and that decision about whether or not to accept that is made by a credentials committee. And there are no rules set out right now for how that decision is to be made. And the recommendation is just that we be more transparent and very clear about what process should be followed. So again, a bit more of the rationale. In practice, the UBCIC does and has always allowed proxies. It's just not set out how that happens. So this would just be a point of clarification and to add some clarity. So the fifth change is that currently the bylaws say that the Chiefs Council will meet basically once every 3 months. In practice, the Chiefs Council meets once every 4 months. So the suggested amendment is to change that so that the acknowledging that it's a more extended meeting time. And the sixth area of proposed change has to do with changes in the Society Act which are imposing restrictions or qualifications for people who can sit both as members of the executive and as senior managers of the organization. So currently, the union's bylaws have some restrictions about who can sit as a member of the executive. Though they're not extensive qualifications. In essence, this person has to agree to forward the title rights and treaty rights mandate of the organization. And there are no restrictions for senior managers, although the bylaws contemplate the executive director position. The Society Act refers to senior managers. So who would senior managers would be? It would be beyond the executive director position. It might, for example, be, and we'd have to look at how they were appointing, it could be the director of research. It could be the director of the library. It could be directors of the different departments within the union. But the Society Act says that the requirement for both senior managers and members of the executive are that they cannot be an undischarged bankrupt, they can't be under a court-ordered incapacity finding, they can have no convictions for fraud or related offenses, and they must act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interests of society and disclose any conflict of interest. I want to turn to conflict of interest later, but in terms of those basic requirements, the recommendation is that these be written directly into the bylaws so that when someone is making a determination of whether or not they want to run for a position, or written in, reflected in nomination papers, reflected in a form of appointment for senior managers so that when someone's appointed as a senior manager, they acknowledge that they're not under a court-ordered incapacity, that they're not an undischarged bankrupt, and so forth. The rationale for that is that these requirements are under the Act. They're not voluntary. And because of that, because the union has to comply with that, it's best to set them out and be very clear about that process. The seventh area of change being proposed has to do with the removal of directors or members of the executive. So in some cases, I think when we look at bylaws of an organization, such as the union that has been around for so long, sometimes you see provisions which might look like reflecting a bit of a scar tissue. So we have a very extensive provision right now in the bylaws dealing with recalls of members of the executive. This reflects a bit of a contentious history. Right now, for a member of the executive to be recalled requires that an application be made and that a recall committee composed of at least 3 members of different nations be appointed, and it sets out why an executive can be removed, including for failing to perform duties, unaccounted absences, or criminal charges unless they're done in the furtherance of title and rights. The change proposed in the Society Act says that a director from now on can be removed by special resolution, so two-thirds of the people who vote for that removal, or by a procedure in the bylaws. So practically speaking, a problem with this is that if we leave the extended provisions in the bylaws, people don't have to follow them if they don't want to. Because this is one of those non-voluntary areas. A director can be removed by special resolution. So the change proposed would be to reflect that, and the proposal for your consideration is whether or not to keep the multi-nation recall committee to guide that process, so that those people might make recommendations, for example, to the Chiefs in Assembly or Chiefs Council based on that, the criteria that we set out for consideration. So that change will be made regardless. It's already been made because of the Society Act. The question is whether or not we want to remove the provision from the bylaws. And the recommendation is that we do, because, as I said, practically speaking, the option already exists, just to bring a special resolution rather than follow that process. So the eighth area where recommendations are being proposed is in the area of conflict of interest. So right now, the bylaws cover conflict of interest in two particular ways. One is that the members of the executive are bound by the UBCIC's conflict of interest policy. And two, given the political nature of the organization, the bylaws were amended when a member of the executive has interests or represents a community who may have interests that are perhaps separate from what the person might speak as a member of the executive, that they have the ability to allow their community to have voice on that issue, to appoint someone to speak on behalf of their community in this forum, to make sure that their concerns specific to the community are heard. And so under the Society Act amendments, one of the largest area of amendments was to beef up the conflict of interest provisions. So, for example, right now, directors and senior managers have to declare real or potential conflicts of interest related to their material interests, and it's important to have this declaration included as part of the record of the society. So what the recommendation is that the UBCIC develop a conflict of interest form which sets out that criteria to be included as part of the conflict of interest policy as a way for the executive or senior managers to disclose potential conflict of interest over material matters, and also to give some guidance as to what that might mean. So to help define, how do you know when you're in a material conflict of interest or an appearance of conflict? So two final areas. One, greater reporting requirements. So right now, there is a requirement that the public can access the financial statements, auditors' reports, and general records, unless the society restricts that access. So the society can't restrict access to financial statements or auditors' reports, but can restrict access to the rest of the records. So the recommendation is that that change be made, providing access, only as much public access as is required by the Act. And the final area of amendment is the fact that the membership is allowed to have access to the full membership list. This has been a somewhat contentious area in the past. The practice of the UBCIC is not to release that membership list aside from in times of election, at which point there's a specific process to release that list. And the rationale for that is that, or the rationale for this recommendation is the Constitution Committee felt it was appropriate to guard the privacy of members and so not release that list. And the recommendation is that the membership list be kept confidential and not released to members unless they, one, apply to the UBCIC, and also an acknowledgement, though, that that list is released in times of election. So those are the 10 areas of I have two number 10s on my list. There's 11 changes. The final change is just that the Act requires a written consent to act as a director. So the final change is just a policy change that the UBCIC create a form whereby members of the executive sign that they're consenting to act as a director to the organization. So those are the 11 areas of proposed amendments. Subject to any discussion, if there's approval in principle, we will draft those and they'll be presented at a further meeting.
Thank you, Ardith. Any questions or comments? Mike 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maureen Chapman, Chief of SCOEL, and thank you, Ardith, for your report. Just a question on the application to the UBCIC. What is that process and how long does that take if whatever you're applying for to the UBCIC?
Garcia. Any other questions or comments? Mike 22.
The proposal would be that in essence be as seamless as possible, so that when you pay your membership dues, that's basically the equivalent of applying for membership. I think some of the political organizations have a bit struggled with how to do that, with how to answer this requirement, which doesn't fit well for us. So I don't think that the intent is actually that it would be weighed and we might say no to someone. I think it would be more permissive, so that the requirement that membership be open to all communities who are currently members, or all bands as it's stated in the bylaws, but that the membership would be invigorated by the payment of fees.
Mike 7.
Thank you. In terms of the last item that you brought up about the society's register, the recommendation says the UBCIC membership list should be kept confidential and not released to other UBCIC members unless they apply to UBCIC. That's where the question arose for me. What is that process?
Oh, I see. Sorry. I think that this would be an application probably to the executive to have access to the list, and it would be a determination made by the executive for what purposes you wanted to use it.
And you could further define that in policy later as well, Ardith?
Yeah.
Mike 17.
Byron Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan Band. And, just, review of what's been presented, and it's good. It's good work and everything. And, it addresses the, basically the mechanics of a society and how it operates and should function. But, I think there's some of the discussion yesterday, and what happened was the question of are we actually advancing what was actually implemented as the mandate? And I'll quickly read that. UBCIC's mandate is work towards the implementation, exercise, and recognition of our inherent title rights and treaty rights, and to protect our lands and waters through the exercise and implementation of our own laws and jurisdiction. So, when we're talking about, about bylaws, it should be also looked at as the other part of that, that goes beyond just the question of the mechanics of the Societies Act to the actual mandate of what's been identified by the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and endorsed September 14th, 2010. I think that's what we really need to look at, and how do we actually move towards that? Because we're simply talking about is the Societies Act of British Columbia and how we actually perfect that. But, I think the more important issue in that is how does that, how does that, line up with our mandate, and how is that helping us to achieve that? And I think there's something in there that we really need to review in that context. Okay, thank you.
Limnum, Chief. Mike 22.
Byron, is this something that you might be interested in joining on the discussion of?
Mike 17?
I don't think he's seen my day planner.
Any other questions or comments? 17?
Byron Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan Band, Hazel Squawkin, Upper Smelkameen.
I guess my concern is that, I guess part of it is what Byron pointed out. But I think that, are we saying that, see, my concern is that we're going, in the future, say, maybe the next election or maybe the second election from now for a president of the UBCIC or whatever position Stuart holds, because to me, he represents all of us, whether we live on the coast, the island, or inland. And so I think I have concerns that, and I see that our lands and all our resources is to be protected under that regime, if I could use that word. Because I wouldn't be concerned if we had the freedom to make decisions for our own future. But we have not been given that right. We are still talking about our traditional laws, our land and title rights. And so to me, we need to look at the whole package, not this term, but the next term. If we're going to make, like I said a couple days ago, changes are coming in our lives. We need to prepare. We need to educate our political system, all our employees. And I want to be able to trust the people that they're going to, when they get elected into those positions, that they're going to protect us. Their interest has to be the Aboriginal people, First Nations, and the lands, the water, all our resources. Because I want us to look at the whole package, not just the system that guards us or that controls our lives. Because, say, Indian Affairs has had control of our lives all these years. And I see on that note here that they're still going to be in charge of our lives to some extent. And are we not talking about taking control of our own lives for the future of our people? You know, in moments like this, I have a vision for our people, but we don't seem to achieve that level because, you know, now we're talking, what is this thing, bylaws. Our bylaws are still under the federal government's control, because to me there's different levels of governance, I guess I could say, that control us. And so, you know, we need to look at that closely. I can't see us making the changes right now, but for the future. we not only need to do that for this position, but for all our positions at the reserve level, because that's where our foundation is. That was our beginning. That's going to be our end. And so UBCIC is not the only one that has to protect our interests. We need to give direction, not only to UBCIC, but the AFN and any other representative that stands up and says, okay, you know, we need to know what we're talking about. We need a clear vision. What do we want for our future? What control do we want? I would like to see, I wish more people would speak up. You know, is there not more concerns from the people? I want different viewpoints. I want to be able to hear. Because if we have a vision and if we have to make a decision about our lives, should we not share those ideas and come up with something that's going to withstand everything for the future? Because I have concerns about INAC and the federal government still having control over us to some extent. So think about that. Wait.
Thank you. Chief Byron? Staying at mic 17.
Barton Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan. My apologies for such a flippant response to you, Ardith. I think, you know, your question about participation, I think it's a little bit broader and, you know, looking at how we do that. I think that addresses all of us sitting in this room. What do we all see? What's the direction of it? What do we want to see when we're talking about the implementation of UBCIC's mandate? How do we want this structured? You know, should we be specifically, gets right down even into agenda, you know, should we be talking specifically title on one day, rights on the next, and the third day going in there and talking about how do we address those issues. But I think it's important that we all have that discussion and take part of that discussion of how we're going to achieve that. And, you know, having an agenda where, you know, it's got 45 minutes per topic about, you know, leaving us from anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes for discussion, is that really adequate? Or should we be downsizing our agendas? This is what I mean by, you know, we should actually be looking at how do we actually, you know, move forward in the future to address that mandate of what we have laid out. And even though the mechanics are important, I do believe that's probably a more important issue that we need to discuss. Okay, thank you.
Chief, mic 6.
Wait for white up and tell us question the holuch, she wap maguluch and jeet clout. My name is Bert Denault. I'm spokesman for the Elders Tribal Council for the Shuwap Maguluch here. I got nominated to do that just the other day. And I've been listening now and I've been involved. I've got lots of history with political things in all my life. And what I'm finding is that we had 50 years, all right, but we still haven't moved very far. I know that for a fact because we're still here. And we're not discussing national issues of our people, like the Shuwap Maguluch. When I talk, don't get offended or anything, because when I speak only for Shuwap Maguluch and our territory. I'm going to read you something here. First off, to get my little word going. In the words of the UN Special Rapporteur, Erica Irene Diaz, if you struggle to gain your rights, you adopt a different relationship with your land, you may gain only power, and you may lose your children and grandchildren. I want to assure you today that the First Nations of British Columbia stand out because you have taken guidance from your hereditary chiefs and elders and have kept them at the forefront of your struggles. This is the crucial strength and should never change. And I sat back there and I said, the UN is talking, we were talking about this, who is a member of this, who is a member of that. I haven't heard put the elders at the forefront of these organizations. There's no elders that are mentioned here about in this whole thing, basically, only that we're poor and there's a few of us here and then feed us a little bit and pat us on the back. And possibly a lot of the chiefs here, I know for a fact, used a lot of the older elders that passed, and I can name a lot of them that just went along and were used as a token elder for the government structure and the development of a colonized governance structure. What I see today is a development of a colonized governance structure continuing the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and all that. Well, that's great. It has done its job. We are in the land title and rights issue. But the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, it is up to us as the Indian people, as Shuwapmik, to implement that. There are many instruments within that document that we shouldn't be discussing today. The number one thing, there's only two choices. The elders of old told me this: choose your path. Choose your path. There's only two paths we got. One is the collective right of what we speak. The other is the fee simple world that we live in and thrive on today, as you can see us operate within that system. It is a fee simple world. Mine, mine, mine. But when we want to really talk reality to be surviving as a Shuwapmik nation or as nations of people, never mind being Indigenous or First Nations, it's a nation of Shuwapmik speaking people of 17 bands. In my nation right now, we are divided. I'll speak candidly and frank today. We have a treaty in the north that has been going on since Bill C-31 came in, 1985. That's how it arrived. Brought in people who didn't want to be Indians. Do you guys remember that? A lot of people probably do, a lot of people don't, or a lot of people want to forget these things happen. So we're stuck. We need to make that choice. And the only thing to do is accept the collective right and go work with the collective right system. I've never heard today or for many times that we're not talking about how do we operate as a collective of the Shuwapmik Nation under the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. Thank you. Or any one of our nations. No, we are getting money's coming down. There's lots of money coming for Native people. And now we're getting consumed by a process that is not Shuwapmik. It is a fee simple world, and that world is going to kill us. We will never survive in the fee simple system we live in today. The collective right must prevail as the number one law, and it is the number one law to the survival of my great children and grandchildren and the futures to coming. So the reality is, let's start talking where the rubber meets the road today. What are the legalities today? All the legal stuff I see, we have natives that are in politics. I've seen senators go up in my time, native people from our communities here. Many of you know them. What have they really done? But only they have to be acceptance of the Canadian governance structure. They cannot develop a Shuwapmik nation because they are steeped in the Canadian law. You're native RCMP, it's the same thing. They're just natives. They might as well be Mexicans or East Indians as a RCMP because they are enforcing Canadian law on our next generations and our future. Enforcing and putting fear in our children and our grandchildren, which shouldn't be in a day and age we live in communications. I am sorry about what I'm not sorry, but I am heartfelt. I feel hurt because we're not moving forward to really help our children. I talk about BC Hydro. I said, how come we don't have free power? That is our resource. There you alleviate problems from our children and our grandchildren so they don't have to pay that excess power. That is our resource. We have timber out there. And we can't go out because why? Oh, we got to obey the laws of Canada. We can't go logging. We got to get a permit. We got to get this. We got to go, oh, you can't hunt in my nation. You're a Shuswap in my band, but I can't go there because federal government, Canada, and the fishery says, oh, you got to get a permit. You got to get a license even to come into your own territory. Where is the justice in that? How do our children survive the next generations? I better quit there. I could go on more, but I may say something later. Thank you.
Jim Elder. Any other questions or comments? Keeping in mind that Ardith has walked you through some minimal amendments to your bylaws, but I think that just as your chair, I should also reference that we are a provincial society. We need to be to receive funding to operate, so there's strings attached and whatnot. But the way your bylaws are drafted, all the decision-making is left to the Chiefs Council. Chiefs Council is not a provincial society. The Chiefs Council is a group of you chiefs making decisions. It just happens that in the structure of your AGA, we combine society business with Chiefs Council business. Maybe in the future, Ardith, we should consider separating societal business, do that first in the morning, the first day, and then the rest of the session is a Chiefs Council meeting. It's your Indigenous political conversations. That's the intent of the AGA. The provincial society is only a vehicle to receive funds. Mike 22?
I'm just going to say thank you.
So that will be an ongoing discussion, but coming back to Byron, Chief Byron's and his elder's comment, that I think that's, and the elder here as well, that talks a little bit more about a total new renewal or revitalization of the organization, which is quite separate than the work that Ardith is doing for you right now. So you might want to wrap your head around that and come up with some kind of resolution at future meetings and see if there's support to do that. Mike 24.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, delegates. With Byron's discussion about how we can structure each day of a Union of BC Indian Chiefs Council and AGA, must be mindful, and I'm just offering comment, that quite often our agenda is full of different evolving and developing information that gets provided to leadership. And so if we are going to alter what we do in terms of topic-specific days, it's going to then remove opportunities for information to be passed. I'm not speaking against what you've suggested because I believe we have to keep evolving with what the opportunities are in front of us today. Thanks.
I think that is another conversation that we don't have time for right now. As I invite forward UBCI, and thank you, Ardith.
Chief Judy Wilson, I just wanted to add clarity because we had those Maori presentations and co-governance presentations prior to our societal bylaw changes, and I think there's just a bit of confusion on, like, there's one path we're on to our self-determination, and we've worked very hard at that, and the union's always very careful in respecting the nation-based approaches and the proper title holders of those nations, or proper, however those nations are organized in in their authority and decision makings of their respective territories. So I think as nations are rebuilding and as nations are reaffirming who has their territorial authority and jurisdictions, that's all the nation building work. The union supports that work, but we don't lead or direct it. We are only directed by resolutions, and that with the society, as Tyrone explained, it's a vehicle. But in the future, however the organization is growing and transitioning, the organization itself will never be a proper title holder. It's the nations who are the proper title holders. We just seek direction when the chiefs gather and delegates, as there may be changes in the Constitution, direct us by resolution for collective efforts in and around protection of inherent title and rights, and all the different work we've done to protect the land, water, and plants and animals, everything that we do here at this table, and how we deal with the federal government and the provincial government as directed by the chiefs and delegates and hereditary, I would add, because there's a lot of hereditary chiefs here and matriarchs. So however that structure is in directing us. I just wanted to add that clarity because we are transitioning, and this next decade, hopefully it won't take that long, is an all-our-nation building. And, as it grows, I think it's very exciting work in each of our respective nations. And what Elder Burt is talking about is a lot of the transition going on in our own Secwepemc Nation. We've been having a lot of gatherings, and of all the 10,000 registered Secwepemc, I hope more Secwepemc turn out. And in our collective history and accounts for our nation, it is collective. Title is held by proper title holders are the people. And they're gathering and they're coming together, and they're directing our leadership in our Secwepemc Nation as well. And we also have our hereditary and spiritual people that meet as well. So it's an exciting time for us all. I just wanted to close with that. Tyrone, thank you.
Cooksham Cookby, two things quickly. Acknowledging and welcoming Regional Director General Catherine Lapa to our forum. I believe she's over on my far right over here, or she was earlier. Welcome, Catherine. Secondly, we're running late on time again. We'll have a working break. If you need a washroom or refreshment break, do so on the fly. We won't be formally stopping. Turning it over to Tijuanit on microphone 2 for a Pathways to Healing update.
Why, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off this morning by thanking everybody for giving me your full attention yesterday. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elaine Alec, and I grew up on the Penticton Indian Band Reserve. And for the first 6 years of my life, I spent with my tama, Elaine Alec, and she spoke nothing but the language. And yesterday I worked really hard to not be emotional because I didn't want to come up here and start crying. And so I worked really hard to not do that. And I always feel like there's a balance. If you cry when you're a woman, then you're disregarded. But if you're too cold and too hard as a woman, then you're also disregarded. So I'm probably going to cry today. And I'm going to be okay with that. Because that's a part of healing, and that's what I'm talking about today, are the pathways to healing. I grew up with my grandma for the first 6 years of my life, and those were the safest, happiest times I ever experienced. She used to tell me coyote stories, and she would rub my back. And when I reach back into my memories and I try to think of those moments where I felt the most love in my life, that was it. And I stayed with her a majority of the time because when I was little, my dad left and my mom was a practicing alcoholic. And there were a lot of parties around me. And so I experienced abandonment, and I experienced sexual abuse and assault. And I saw it happening all around me with all of my friends, all my age We all experienced it or witnessed it. And there was incest, and there were a lot of things going on that we didn't want to talk about. And so those are the things that I carry with me when I try to be a leader and do what's right. I'm constantly having to check myself to see if what I'm sharing is from those hurts. I started drinking when I was 12 years old, and I struggled with alcoholism really bad for a majority of my young life. And I hurt a lot of people, and I abused a lot of people, and I was violent, and I did a lot of things in my life that I carried and I had shame for a really long time. And on October 10th, in a few days, I'll be celebrating my 11 years of sobriety. And through my sobriety, I've learned to be honest, to be rigorously honest with who I am. And I think the hardest thing for me to do was to forgive myself and to let go of the shame and to start talking about the things that happened to me when I was little so that I could let it go. And I think silence is one of the things that really hurts our people. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to acknowledge it. And if we don't talk about it and don't acknowledge it, then it festers inside of us, and we hold on to that anger and that pain, and it doesn't allow us a space to heal. And so I share my story. That's one of my ways of creating safe space for people to come forward, to know that they're not alone, and to know that it's okay, and that I'm a safe space to share their stories with. And sometimes I don't know if that's always the best thing for me, because when I speak like this, I get so many messages from women. And I have so many women come up to me afterwards to say thank you, because they can't speak out about what happened to them. And so I get angry. I want to acknowledge the men at this table. I want to especially acknowledge my husband, Ryan Day. He has shown me how to be vulnerable. He has taught me respect and love and trust. And I am so thankful for having him in my life, for being that role model, for being there for my children, and for holding me up and allowing me space to speak for myself, and for not trying to fix me. I want to hold up Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, who's been my dad for most of my life, and who's never afraid to tell me how it is, who's never afraid to give me feedback, and who always reminds me that there's nothing else out there but love. Always speak from a place of love. I hold up our chiefs so much. I've worked with leadership all across this country, and I see how women are treated across this country. And I guarantee you, if I were speaking like this at any of those tables, most of the men probably would have walked out. So I want to hold up the men in this room, the men who continue to support me, who continue to listen, and who continue to be okay with being a little bit uncomfortable. And I want to thank the men who are not afraid to come up to me and give me feedback, because I'm not a delicate flower just because I cry. I cannot grow if I don't get feedback from people. One of the reasons why I've been so upset with our political meetings and our big soirees in Ottawa and how things happen, it isn't. I said at the BC caucus at AFN that there were stories that I could not share because they did not belong to me. And I'm always balancing of when I say things and how I say things, because I don't want it to be about the election. And I don't want it to be about creating waves. And I think that when I decided to speak out a few times, it was bad timing because it took away from the real issue that I wanted to address. When we were in Vancouver, I had a number of young women who were female youth representatives for the AFN who talked to me about their concerns for their safety at meetings, and especially at the Christmas parties and the after parties where there's drinking. And when they see leadership drinking and getting out of hand, and when people start being inappropriate. And there's so many of our young women who've come out, our young women in leadership who've come out, who've been assaulted, who've been spoken to, who've been touched, and who are too afraid to say anything. Those were the things that I was talking about. And I'm sharing this because I have faith in my leadership. I have faith in the men at this table that you will keep an eye out for them. If you choose to go to any of those meetings, that you keep an eye out for them. And you call it out if you see something happening. Because this will not be the first time that that young woman has been touched or talked to in that way. And any little gesture, any little touch, any little comment could bring up her past feelings and her past trauma. And it might seem like a little thing to you, but it's a lifetime of abuse that she's had to deal with. When we started working on this policy and working on this booklet for creating safe pathways for healing to address sexual harassment and violence in our communities, we wanted to figure out how to indigenize it. And I started talking about this a little bit yesterday, and I went off on another tangent. But when we talk about safe pathways and we talk about indigenizing and we talk about safety of our women, we realize that we can't just create safe pathways for women. If we're truly making this indigenous, we have to make safe pathways for our men, and we have to make safe pathways for our youth, and we have to make safe pathways for our elders, and we have to make safe pathways for the abusers, because hurt people hurt people. And when I went through my experience 4 years ago where I was sexually assaulted by one of our leaders, I had a really hard time with that. And I was quiet for a long time, and then all of a sudden I couldn't get out of bed anymore. And I couldn't work and I couldn't think. And I thought I was going crazy because I felt suicidal, and I didn't know where it was coming from because I had years of sobriety. I had years of working on healing, and yet all of these things came back to me and I didn't know why and where they were coming from. And I started thinking about protecting the person who had touched me inappropriately. And I worried about their family, and I worried about their children, and I worried about what people would think about me. And I worried about whether people would thought I was causing problems. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I went through every type of healing process I could think of to get me through that, because it was the scariest moment of my life to ask the person who had done that to me to come meet with me face to face and have a mediated discussion, because I didn't want to shame him. And it wasn't to protect him, but it was for me as part of my healing and understanding that he had a history. And if I shamed him, would that help him or would that stop him? And so we did have a mediated session, and I told him all about my childhood, and I told him all about the hurts and pains, and I asked him to never do that again. And then he shared his story with me, and he talked about all of his hurts and pains and the boundaries. And I told him I loved him enough to ask him to come sit with me face to face, because I really did think he was a good leader. And I think that's some of the issues we have. You know, we want to support men to be stronger. We want to support men to be good leaders. And we know that we all have character defects and we're not perfect. And so it's like, do you support that person because they did this bad thing, or do you shun them, or what do you do? Like, those are all the types of things and questions that come up when we're dealing with this. And then, of course, it's so easy to make it political. When I went to the police and filed my complaint, the police told me that my complaint wasn't a sexual assault complaint. It was a political issue, and I should deal with it with the Leadership Council. That's what the RCMP told me. And so there's so many reasons why women don't come forward and why women don't speak up and speak out. And I think that the only way that we can address this is to talk about it and to listen to each other and do our best to do it from a place of love so that it doesn't feel like we're being attacked. We're creating this book to address sexual harassment and assault and policy for the aftermath, for after it happens, for the women who are dealing with it right now, so that we can create those safe pathways to healing and start breaking the cycle. But our ultimate goal is to create safe pathways for everybody so that we can prevent this from happening, so that we can go back to our traditional structures and our teachings, where our laws tell us what is right and wrong, where we know as individuals how to hold ourselves up and how to be a part of a family and how to be part of the community and how to be part of the land. If we're not healthy, our land is not healthy. Our teachings are holistic. So every single thing that we deal with at this table has to do with self. If we want to heal our families, if we want to heal our communities, if we want to heal our land, we have to heal ourselves. And healing ourselves only starts when we have conversations like this. This conversation does belong at this table. And I want to hold up the leadership here because I know what you go through at home. I see the violence that happens against you. I know that you're taken away from your families, from your children, and I know that you're abused. And so the last thing I want to do is come here and make you feel like you're doing another thing wrong, because that's not my intention. So I hope you all pass my resolutions that get presented tomorrow. We want to continue doing this work to create safe pathways to healing for everybody so that we can stop feeling that shame and carrying those things that don't belong to us anymore. We all have character defects, and it's okay. We have to learn to forgive ourselves so that we can forgive others. And I really want to take this time to thank you for giving me this time and this space. Wait, Lim.
Byron Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan Band, introducing our elder, Jane Stilkaya from the Sioux Indian Band.
I'm 88 and a half years old now, and I was just wondering if anybody here is older than me or a little younger. I was born in 1930, and the changes that has come along since then, it's so different. I've been like in two different worlds. Back in my day, since this was brought up, I thought I'd speak on it. All our people back then, all Indian people, didn't matter where, they were all sober people. Working people, hard-working people. They all were cowboys and Indians, and ranchers that I know. Since back in 1949 or 50, I thought I'd share this too. The government had changed their laws or whatever, and you can they opened the liquor to the Indians. That was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. It changed the Indian people because they didn't know how to handle the liquor. The people that had a bunch of cattle, horses, everything, had nice ranches, nice homes. It went all to hell. I was lucky that I didn't have to go to residential school because somehow we had one of the best teachers, I would say, in the world, for the way I think about him, because he didn't take our language away, he encouraged us. And it's the Enkimip Indian Day School. You've heard a lot about it. And they didn't take our language away. But going back to the liquor and the booze, it sure changed our people. It's not us. We don't, back then, we don't do the liquor and the drugs. Now it's here, and what are we going to do about it? And I get so upset. Oh, myself, I drank too. I'm not an angel, I'm just like anybody else. And when I drank, I was different. I don't know if I should say I go Indian. But anyway, it changed us all. When a person starts drinking or parties, there's been a lot of killings, a lot of people freezing to death. Oh, I could go on, and I just thought I'd bring this up because it was brought up by you. And I thought I'd remind the people that the booze isn't for us, the parties isn't for us. That's all white man stuff. And the Christmas is supposed to be a religious celebration, but they celebrate it with booze and drugs and whatever.
it's supposed to be a family day. It's a New Year's where you celebrate. And what I have experienced in my lifetime, it's a very hard one for the people and for the children. The children that I have some here, I don't know if I have time for that now, but I'd like to show it before we leave. So I guess I will say why for now. Wait.
Thank you.
Mike, you're between 16 and 17. 16?
My name is Harvey McLeod, Almihom Chief, Upper Nicola Band. I'd like to start out by just acknowledging and thanking Chief Fred and his council and his community for hosting us, the Shuwapmak Nation for hosting us. And would like to raise my hands and thank you, Elaine, for sharing and helping us understand. And when I walked in here yesterday, I know I did a lot of work on myself. When I walked in, I looked at that top bench up there in the corner. That's where little Harvey sat. Did he envision himself one day sitting on this side in a meeting in a circle like this? No. Actually sitting on the girls' side. The girls used to sit on this side. But it's a topic and a discussion that we need to have. We have to make space for this. And a reminder that I have and will continue to deal with the demons and the issues that I faced during my lifetime that started here at this school. Right out that exit door, there's a little brick column that I made a deal with God. You leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. Thank you very much. You don't talk to me and I won't talk to you, and we'll have a really good life. So starting from there and doing the work not for myself, but I guess it is for myself, so I can, but to have a better relationship with my daughters and my grandkids and make apologies to the people that I've hurt in my lifetime. And if I don't do that work, then I won't understand. Nor could I be a person that walks around in my community and sees the hurt and pain and not do anything about it. I can at least walk around the community and say I am doing my work and I am a better person for it. But I'm not going to share that and tell you that I'm a better person than you are. I'm going to show you by the love that I give my children and my grandchildren and my partner. And if I can do that, it'll give me the strength to come and do this work. And I really had to think in the last couple of years, because we hear of and we are told and we are asked and we advance reconciliation. But do we really know what that means? And before I can talk about reconciliation, I had to reconcile with myself. And then I'll be able to have discussions with you about reconciliation, and we can discuss what reconciliation means to you. And it's a heavy topic. But we have to go there. We're doing a lot of work in our community to have open discussion like this, because it's a topic and discussion that we never wanted to talk about. But a few years ago at the nation level, Okanagan Nation level, we talked about we have to go home and open our curtains and see what's going on. We can't hide behind our curtain anymore because we are moving forward. We've made a lot of peace and we've had a lot of forgiveness for how we were treated. And now I can't move forward and allow my grandchildren to have the impacts that I've shared with my partners or with my children. So I thank you, Elaine, for having the courage and the strength to do this. And we have to continue to listen and understand and support one another while we move forward. Because if we're going to survive and if we're going to accomplish a lot of things that we've talked about around this table, we're going to need a lot of strong people to do that. So with that, I thank you, White Limlet.
Limlet Chief. Being mindful we have a resolution tomorrow morning, any concluding remarks? Mike 2.
White Limlet.
Thank you. I've been informed that our 1 o'clock agenda item around the Child Welfare Regional Director General Catherine Lapa has a hard stop at 2 o'clock for a flight at 3. So we're going to move immediately into the UBCIC submission of the National Inquiry, inviting forward Salima Samnani and Robin Gervais. This might push us a little bit into lunchtime, but irregardless, we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock sharp to move into child welfare. So we've got about a half an hour in total. Who's starting? 22? You start? 23?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin
23?
by... Oh.
Try that.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the territory of the... And I'm going to... Okay, thanks. Acknowledging the territory, and I'm going to go slow with this because I'm learning, of the Stikemloops Secwepemc Nation. Thank you. And for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Robin Gervais. I'm a lawyer practicing in Vancouver. I'm Métis Cree from Saskatchewan. My family's from Duck Lake, Saskatchewan. And I've been working with UBCIC on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry since about June of 2017, so about a year and 3 or 4 months. And I'm here with my co-counsel, Salima Samnani, who I'll just ask her to briefly introduce herself, and then we'll go into our presentation. And just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today is where things are at with the inquiry, how UBCIC has decided to move forward within the structure of the inquiry, and a plan for participation that we hope will include as many of you, if not all of you, as we look at putting together closing submissions. So I'll just let Salima introduce herself very quickly.
Mike 22.
Hi, my name is Salima Samnani, and I want to thank Robin and UBCIC for inviting me to do this work with them and trusting me with this important work. I will be doing, I'll speak a bit later actually about what I'll be doing, but I'll just tell you a bit about myself, is that I worked on the Provincial Missing Women's Inquiry as Commission Counsel, and I bring that experience to this commission. I also am a supervising lawyer at the Indigenous Community Legal Clinic and a lecturer at UBC Law School. I also work with a number of advocacy organizations in the downtown east side. So I do bring all that knowledge with me that hopefully will be helpful in moving this file forward.
Thanks. So when I last...
23?
Sorry. When I last spoke with you was at the last Chiefs Council meeting on June 27th. And at that time, we talked about the inquiry process and how UBCIC had made a decision not to participate in the institutional and expert hearings that would look at certain topics for reasons in that the participation really wasn't meaningful. And there was a resolution that was passed February 22nd, 2018, which defined meaningful resolution. And the way that the inquiry was framed and set out and the hearings were set out and framed, there was no way to participate meaningfully. So at that time, talked about UBCIC putting forward a closing submission. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. After that June meeting, went back to UBCIC and began meeting with the policy analyst, Rachel Singleton-Polster, and policy director, Andrea Glickman, and project researcher, Laura Lee Sepsi, to discuss ways about how to put together a closing submission to the inquiry that would include input from the communities, because we want it to be a meaningful submission. Usually when legal submissions are done, they take kind of a regurgitation of all of the evidence that the inquiry or trial or whatever it may be has heard, and then put that together and then make an argument based on law and the evidence. But in this case, this is not a trial, this is an inquiry, and we want to hear from the communities about what is going on in your community that is contributing to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So we also didn't know a time frame for which we would have to do this because the inquiry wouldn't communicate with us or with anybody to give us a time frame. So what we started envisioning was a survey, putting together a survey that we could put to the communities that has certain questions around root causes and proposed recommendations from the communities based on what you're seeing in your communities. So I tried to get information throughout the summer, beginning actually in the late spring throughout the summer to get a deadline for closing submissions. And we didn't get that until mid-September. We were told that written submissions are due early November. I'm going to let Salima talk more about the timelines and UBCIC's decision to not stick to that hard timeline, but more to focus on getting information from the communities to make a meaningful closing submission. So what we have done, and actually I wasn't a part of creating the survey, but what Salima and UBCIC have done is created a survey that has a series of questions that will ask communities what are the root causes of violence towards Indigenous women and girls in your community? What are some potential remedies that you see? What are some traditional teachings in your community that you might want the inquiry or the government to know about as potential remedies or prevention? And so today we have that survey here, and myself and Salima are going to be here for the remainder of the day. We have a space across the hall, across adjacent to this building. There's another building. We have a space there. And we're asking that anyone who wants to give feedback to the inquiry, that you can come and speak to us. You don't have to do the entire survey. If you only have 10 minutes and you want to pick 2 questions or 1 question, or there are 10 yes or no questions and that's all you want to do, that's fine. But we really want to hear from you because ultimately we're 2 lawyers. These aren't our submissions, these are your submissions. And we want to hear what you have to say about what is happening in your community with respect to these issues so that we can put that to the inquiry and also to the government, and so that it can be done in a meaningful way. So again, Salima and I will both be here today till 5:30 or I guess until everybody leaves to go to dinner. Salima is going to be here tomorrow until lunch. And then as for me, I just accepted a position with UBC investigating sexual assault complaints. So I won't be working on this any longer after today, but Salima will be, and there will be other opportunities to speak with her. The survey is also going to get emailed out to everybody, and I understand that she may be kind of cold calling people as well. So I think you may be hearing from Salima a lot over the next month or so to try and get feedback from the communities. And so I'll let Salima expand on the survey itself and anything else she wants to talk about, and then we're of course open to any questions that you may have.
As we move to mic 22, just acknowledging and welcoming Regional Chief Terry T.G. He was in the house a second ago. Regional Chief, welcome. Mic 22.
So I'll just pick up where Robin left off. And so now I see that everyone has one of those surveys. We've tried to make it really thorough to make sure there's at least a few questions there that apply to your nation. If you want to answer every one of those questions, I've got the time for that. I'm happy to sit for 2, 3, 4 hours over a number of sessions. If you want to sit for 5 minutes and answer one question that's really on your mind for your community, well, we can do that. Like Robin said, the yes/no questions I think will take about a minute or two. You can just circle them right there on that piece of paper and hand it to me, or come sit with me or Robin and do that. I'm available for the rest of the day. I will come to the dinner, and so if anyone wants to talk to me after the dinner, I am available. I'm also staying at the same hotel as most of you are, so if you want to meet around breakfast, I can stay at the hotel. It's such a nice space. We can, meet there instead of here tomorrow, really any time. I will also be calling you. Please come and give me your numbers. I'm going to have a little bit of a sign-up sheet to take your numbers and your email addresses. I'd love to have any conversations that you want to have. You should have also received my business card, and if not, please come and see me. I'm happy to give you my business card. Call me whenever you want, and we'll find a time to connect. And what I really encourage you to get, the information that's the most helpful for these commissions, is what would you want the commission to know specifically about your nation, and what can you tell us about what you'd want UBCIC to lobby the commission and then lobby the government to provide specifically for your nation, rather than broad platitudes about what they can do. We can maybe try and nail them down to some specific commitments to make to your nation. And as for an update, right now or in the next day, the Winnipeg hearings are going on, and they're on child protection, with Professor Cindy Blackstock appearing and a few other notable speakers. As Robin has probably alluded in her previous conversations and presentations, that we are not attending or participating at the hearings because there's lack of meaningful contributions, so I am not there. There's also going to be another hearing in St. John's, and that one's on street work and trafficking. These are all live streamed if you're at all interested in seeing any of these. But if you do have any questions about the materials presented at any of these hearings, please do reach out. I'm happy to provide those to you. In terms of closing submissions, as Robin said, we've just received the deadline. We've just received notice, really, of when the orals are, and they're in end of November, December. However, we have not been given a deadline for when the written submissions are due. They said they were, the rumor is that I will have to have them done by the beginning of November. And given that that's not a meaningful amount of time for me to consult with as many of you as possible and get the information into a meaningful submission, at a recent meeting we had with a number of groups, the decision was made that a number of groups are going to write a letter to the commission saying that we are not going to adhere to their timeline of whatever it turns out to be, but whatever it is, we're not going to adhere to it and submit closing submissions in November or even in December, that we're going to take our time, we're going to do the best job possible, and we're going to submit our submissions when they're good and ready. and that might be January or February. And because there's going to be a big group of us, hopefully that puts some pressure on them that they can't just say, well, UBCIC was late. They'll have to kind of stop and consider this whole host of groups that are going to be having delayed submissions. I do want to assure you that it's not all for naught because we are putting our submissions in late. We will be putting a lot of pressure on the Commission to consider the submissions that we make, but also there is a strategy brewing in the back about when we do have our submissions ready, UBCIC and other groups that have decided to submit their submissions late, their closing submissions, are going to do a big media release and send the submissions to various governments, put a lot of pressure on them to read our recommendations and account for them. So even if we miss this deadline deliberately, please don't be disheartened that there's going to be, really any negative consequences. We can assure you that we're lobbying for positive consequences to come from that. And the motivation for the late submissions is just do the best job possible, really. So I really encourage you to, take a read of these questions, circle which ones you want to answer. Please come find me and Robin, and we really look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
23?
I just want to say one last thing that, because I've been working on this inquiry now for quite a while, and I've presented at 3 Chief Council meetings prior to this AGA, and the feedback I got from people was, you're coming here with bad news, what can we do? And I was honestly stumped because other than what we had done, which was write letter after letter after letter seeking information about what was going on at the inquiry, when hearings were going to be held. We wrote letters to government, we wrote letters to the inquiry, we wrote letters as the coalition, we wrote letters as joint organizations. I really felt like, other than some sort of like media shaming or political strategy, there wasn't much we could do. So this I feel good about, in that it's something that we can do. We can get the feedback from you, and we can put that feedback to the government and to the inquiry. So I really urge you and hope that you will today speak with us, and then in the future speak with Salima if you can't today. And I think then just one comment.
So with Robin and Selena set up next door, they're willing to chat with any of you. You don't have to be a chief or a delegate. They're willing to talk to citizens. So they're available to do that. And also it'll give you a chance to check out the vendors that are over there if you haven't seen them yet. So we do have a few minutes for questions and comments.
Okay, so do you want us to go get her? Okay.
You need a microphone. Just walk up to one and I'll yell it out. Mic 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Vivian Tom with Wet'suwet'en First Nations. I've already relayed my story in Smithers, my hometown, about when I lost my daughter in March 2013, and she left behind a 3-year-old girl at the time, and now she's 8. I found out that there was funding set up for the kids that are in care that are being raised by their grandparents or a foster home. And the thing is, I'm under my granddaughter's under Section 24(1), where she's not totally in care, but she's being raised by her grandparents, my husband and I. And I found out that her name was not on the list for the trust fund, and I don't know why that is. I think it has to do with the MCFD setting up those funds, and I know at one time my daughter's name was taken off the list because the murder was solved and they found out it was the baby's dad that had murdered her. And but we didn't know for a year and a half before they found out what had happened to her. And my question is, how can they discriminate between one child and the next when their mother is murdered or their father is murdered? There are so many grandparents that are raising their grandchildren because the mothers go missing or are murdered. And just last week or a week and a half ago, I don't know if you've all heard that back in our hometown, we buried a young mom that was 18 and she had a 1-year-old daughter. And she was missing for 3 weeks before they found her. She was badly beaten. And I think a GoFundMe was set up. Like, we can't, I'd like to provide for my granddaughter after I'm gone. I want her to be well taken care of, but, how can they discriminate when both parents or all these parents are murdered, and yet not every child has equal access to the same rights that another child does? It's just uncalled for, and it's it's frustrating because, for one, I call them kids of trauma. They've been raised in a traumatic experience, losing not just one, but both parents in one day. And, not only that, they're bullied in our communities because they have no mom and dad. And because of the bullying, some of them are suicidal. And we need to not just protect them, but to show them how to be strong. That's one thing I tell my granddaughters. You have to be strong like Grandma. You have to be strong like Grandpa. There's so much that we go through in our lives that I don't knock one thing down, and I don't put the way my grandparents raised me. You don't put any churches down. You don't put any spirituality down, because that's the way that you become strong. And so I've taught my granddaughter to pray, and I like to participate in the survey question. And as for equal opportunity for all of these kids, I don't want one child to be left out. They've been left out enough already. They've lost out a lot. I know my granddaughter still cries for her mom when she really gets hurt or when she gets really sick. And there are other grandparents that are out there that are strong, that are doing their best to raise their grandkids. And, I just, like I said, I don't want one child to be left out just because of another person or an adult's regulations that or policies that will hinder the situation, not help it. Thank you.
Must see Chief, Mike 17.
Byron Lewis, Chief of the Okanagan Band. I thank you for your comments and this questions. I'm going to see what we can do to actually get this filled out. But I think one of the most important points is that we got to deal with is why are these young girls leaving these communities? Why are they going and putting themselves in danger by hitchhiking or doing such things? And I think one of the things that really bothered me out of, this whole residential school settlement in the past is that it never dealt with effectively with multi-generational traumas. And although it actually settled with the first generation, I am a second generation, my daughters are a third. And the problems of that residential school goes very deep in a lot of our communities when you start going into the actual traumas in there. And it's not only took away our languages, but it took away also our cultures. And some of the things you talk about in this questions are found all through what we call with our people, it's chaptich. And chaptich is the stories and its cultural traditions of our people, but it's much more than that. It's how we actually teach. And if you're familiar with chaptich, you know there's stories in there that talks about such sensitive things as incest, and it deals with Coyote. And Coyote is what he had done to his daughters, what Coyote had done to others and these. But, we must understand that our people have always told us we are the children of Coyote, then that means that we're capable of the very worst and we're capable of the very best and everything in between. Those stories basically were teaching guides, and each time you actually remember a story, and as you age, the story changes in your understanding and it becomes a lot clearer of what that actual story was about. And it's not a child's fairy tale, it's basically about how we actually live as a people. That was taken. And that was taken from about, I bet you 95% of my community of 2000. And we also talk about, the intergenerational traumas. How many people in this community, if you asked for, that are amongst us, if you ask, do they actually have basically a strategy for mental health? And, I bet you're a number of people in this room, out of 202 bands, you'd be hard-pressed to find one community that actually has developed a mental health strategy to help these people to get through some of these problems that they've actually went through. And it talks about childhood traumas. It talks about being able to have those support mechanisms where people that actually suffered from abuse could actually go and to see and talk and to have these issues at least addressed through mental health. Now, we have a couple more opportunities. We got one is through the day school, another one is, I think, schools that are set up on the reserves in there for another crack at being able to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place to actually push through these, making sure that each one of our communities has, as a part of our health departments, a very strong mental health component to that can actually address these issues. And until then, I'm sorry to say, but I think we're going to keep on hearing these problems. We need to address it. Canada identified damn near $6.5 billion was required to deal with mental health. And at the same time, there was never a study done on Aboriginal peoples and the effects of residential schools in terms of mental health and problems that you see today. These are some of the things that we really need to address around this table, and some of the things we should be talking about, because it ties right back in with title and rights, it ties back in with everything, because we need to be able to be, our peoples, being able to strong enough in the future. We have a very young population, but they are not well. And that, again, people my age and my generation, neither are we. So these are some of the things that if there's anything that comes out of this inquiry, it needs to be able to address that issue and help us actually move to where we need to go on that. And that is having the ability for us to be healthy, not only physically, but also mentally.
Lieutenant Chief, acknowledging Selena and Robin are here the rest of today, and Selena till lunchtime tomorrow, and we're getting up against lunch. We'll hear from two more speakers, and then we'll go to concluding remarks. Mike 6.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda K. Peters. I'm a Seabird Island Band Council member, and I am the auntie to Shawnee Inyali, who's been missing now for over 2 months. I've been involved with trying to create awareness for murdered and missing Indigenous women now for quite a few years. And just recently, July the 15th or 16th was the last time that my niece, Shawnee, was last seen. The family has been trying as much as they can to search for her. We've checked all the homeless camps in Hope and Chilliwack. We've done highway searches from Hope to Mission, where she's known to walk and hitchhike. We've done some riverbank searches as well. We've handed out flyers. And what I found was we encountered many obstacles and challenges along the way. We didn't get much help from the local authorities. On our highway search, we had the RCMP drove up and down the road with their lights on. That was the extent of the help we got there. I went to the Hope Search and Rescue and asked them to come and help us as well. Because we're a group of family who don't really know what we're doing. We're just out there looking and doing whatever we can. But we needed some professional help and some professional guidance. Search and Rescue turned me down 3 times because they're governed by the province. And they can't go out unless it's an immediate urgent situation or there's been some sort of sighting. So they couldn't come with us. So we had a group the first time on the highway search of probably 45 people. We did the best we could and broke them up in different groups and searched where we thought would be good places to look. I asked the Search and Rescue if they would even come and, even one of them, if one of them could come and talk to the group before we left, just to give us some sort of guidance and direction. And they couldn't even do that, they said, because if anything happened on the search, they would be held liable for anything. So we went on our own. And the same with the riverbank search. We put a call out for, hoping we could get, quite a few boats, fishermen and things like that. We got 3 boats to search from Hope to Mission, which is a long way, and you can't cover that much ground with 3 boats. We had 20 volunteers, and we did what we could in that area as well, too. We dropped off people along the shores and picked them up. We had those 3 boats out there on the river, and it was pouring rain. But they were out there helping us search regardless. I know that there's a shortage of RCMP and First Nations constables. But I think that we need our own, one of the things that I think we need is, in Winnipeg they have the Bear Clan Patrol, and they go out and walk the streets and trying to keep the women safe at night. I've even been in touch with them to ask them how we could set up something like that out here. They're going to send me some information on how to do that. Also, I think because of the number of murdered and missing Indigenous women that has been going on for decades, I think we need our own Aboriginal search and rescue, because these guys can't come with us, they say. I think we need to train our own people to do that. And then they can come with the families. They can come with us when we want to go search for our loved ones. But is there funding for that? Is there funding out there to fund Aboriginal search and rescue? That's one of my questions. We're organizing. I should say, backtrack here, we didn't get much help from the RCMP until I brought it up in Gatineau, and we got Grand Chief Doug Kelly and Regional Chief Terry TG on board. And then the following Monday, the RCMP called our family in, and they did a really thorough report with us. They spent 2 or 3 hours telling us what they had been doing over the past couple of months. I mean, it took our First Nations leaders to get on their case before they actually shared anything with us. So for 2 months, we didn't have any idea where she was last seen, what she was wearing, or anything like that. And every time we asked, they always told us, we can't say anything, it's under investigation. But they are now starting to get on board. We had another Stoller Tribal Council meeting, and Superintendent Brian Massey and John Brewer, I believe it was, have agreed to work with us, the family, and also possibly Aboriginal Search and Rescue. We talked about that too. We're doing another search on October the 14th, and the RCMP agreed to deploy some of their RCMP boats. They're going to ask DFO and Search and Rescue to also help us. I just wanted to share that. And also, I would be interested in finish the survey as well. Thank you.
Mike 8.
My name is Quitaltmaslit. My English name is Nikki Larock, and I am representing Yakukuyus First Nation. In regards, as I've had the experience of having my life threatened from a man, and I had to go in hiding for 2.5 years, and I had very little help from the police. So I did reach out to the leaders. Some of the leaders sit around this table. In the background, they went and talked to the police themselves. But some of the things that I would like to see in our communities are, I know there was tribal police before in the Fraser Valley. I don't know what happened to that. I feel like we could use our own tribal police, an women's emergency line and rescue line. I've come across many incidences in Chilliwack where women they're being beaten right in their vehicle, and the women are like jumping out of the car. I've come across that many times, and it triggers me, and I don't know what to do. And I've called the police, and the police said, don't go chase them, don't go get her, because you don't know what you'll get yourself into. You could put yourself in danger as well. So what do I do? Just let her, who knows what will happen to her? A rescue line, so women can call when they're in this situation, and they can call somebody to come pick them up, secretly pick them up, pick them and their children up. Another thing that I faced was that I wasn't able to get into any transition homes because I had teenage children. And being in the transition home that I was in, I had to give my kids up to their father, and I was in a town where I was away from my normal life of being up the mountains and my culture, and that took me away from my culture, and that was a huge part of my life, and I was feeling like I was losing my mind because I couldn't continue, I couldn't leave anywhere, I couldn't go to my cultural ceremonies because I had a curfew at the transition house. And the policing system, I've been told, call 911, call 911. I've called 911, they didn't show up for 3 hours. I could have been killed already. And the only place that I felt safe was in my longhouse, but I didn't want to be in my community because I was afraid for my whole family. My whole family was afraid. My whole community was afraid of this man. And still, he just got a slap in the wrist. They still did nothing. He still lives in the same town as me. And one thing that I would like to bring to my own community is self-defense for the young women and the adults. Self-defense, being available to them, self-identity, self-awareness, awareness on abuses and respectful relationships, and building family relations. And I feel like there's no protection in the policing system. I feel like we need to do it ourselves and have safe homes in all of the communities, in every community, a safe home and a women's helpline. And that every community knows where these safe homes are, so that if there are women hitchhiking and there is something that comes up, then they will know where to go. They'll know who to call. This is so scary to talk about. I haven't totally dealt with the issue yet, so it still freaks me out. But yeah, thank you.
Responses, concluding remarks? Sure. Mike 23.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who shared both their experience and their amazing recommendations. And this is exactly what we're looking for. So thank you. And we look forward to hearing from as many of you as possible. Again, if not today, then within the next month or so. But preferably today, since we're here. And I think it's best if we can have a one-on-one conversation. I'm not sure if Salima has anything to add.
Mike 22.
Well, I just want to say, like, even this, 10 minutes we've spent chatting, I feel like I can write 10 recommendations that we could lobby so hard on. So already, we can see in 10 minutes we can do so much. So please do come find us, because we've really got all the time in the world for you.
Great. Thank you. As I invite forward Elder Russell Casimir to bless the food, bless the table, turn the mic over to Kwagwagila, Chief Jack. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. Mike 17. You had a quick announcement? Mike 17.
Gela Kessler, Clarko Gela from Owitchet. I just wanted to give you an update on one of our community members. His name is Cody Savey. And a few meetings ago in June or May, I think it was at the Rights Implementation Workshop, but Cody is a WHL hockey player, and this year he is playing full-time with the Seattle Thunderbirds Hockey Club. His line mates when he first started, when he was 15, was Ethan Bear and Matthew Barzal, the Rookie of the Year in the NHL last year. And I just wanted to give you an update. And the family, Cody's family, Eva and Wes, they said thank you to everybody that supported him on that day that we raised him some funds for him. He's doing really well. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that helped him out in his aspiration to becoming a NHL player. Kleko.
Kleko. As I turn it over to our hosts to bless the food, I understand they're also sending out prayers for Mildred Chartrand. Many of you might have noticed she's not here. She's typically at every union meeting. She's in Vancouver General Hospital with liver issues right now. So encouraging everyone to send prayers out to her as well, to those suffering in your community as well. Mike 2.
Wagged, Cookschem. We had a very heavy morning. Say some prayers for all the ladies that gave their stories. The men that talked about reconciliation here. All of those things are heavy issues, and especially for our ladies. When they handed out the reconciliation, I was here when they brought the commissioner here. And a lady asked me, "No man has apologized." And I said, yes, I did. I did it nationally. I apologize to all the ladies for any abuse and shame that we've caused them for generations that we've been alive. I'm like the chief. My family. Reconciliation is a hard thing to deal with. They can give us $1 million each, and it still wouldn't take the pain away from us. We were taught not to love. So it's going to take the generations that come behind us to find a way to find that love. We just ask the ladies, please forgive us for what we've done to you. And understand that we, as men, were part of the abuse that took place in these schools. We weren't shown love, we were shown hatred. Love was something that you did quick and got over with and said goodbye. That was the love that we were understood. So again, we're sorry to the ladies, and I hope that they find the little lady that's gone missing. We also have the same problems throughout our nation. In our community, there's ladies that have gone missing and dead, found, but no investigations. So we're all in the same boat. I ask the grandfathers to lift up your hearts. Take some of the pain away. Today, it was a very heavy morning. It's only going to get worse by this afternoon. I see social services going to be part of it. I ask you to pray hard and ease your hearts and sit with some friends, talk with some friends. Help yourselves. And I ask you, grandfather, to take care of the meals that's been handed out. It's down there. I ask you to give them good blessings for all the people here that gave themselves here. Watch over them today, tomorrow. Hoo-ha.
Cook's Jim, two things quickly. Cook Biron Ignace has a video that we're playing over lunch, as well as one of the local councillors would like to address the chiefs. Microphone 2.
White tip, Roseanne Casmer, Kmeeple at the Commons of Schwetmik. I'm very honored to be up here to say a few words. I wanted to do a special prayer in Schwetmik for someone that you all know.
Can we have your attention, please? Have your attention, please? Everyone? We're about to start another prayer. Could we have everyone's attention, please?
Cook's Gem. I wanted to say a special prayer in Schwetmik for someone that you all know. Her name is Mildred Chartrand. She's a very dedicated and committed employee with UBCIC for the past 25 years. And she's always been the first point of contact. She's probably one of the most level-headed people that we know. She's one of the kindest people that you could possibly meet. And some people describe her as being like a Sherlock Holmes. She knows all, she fixes all, she takes care of all, and that includes everyone that's been in contact with her. Right now, she needs our special prayers. She's in a hospital, and she's going through an extreme liver failure right now, and so we just want to offer up our prayers on behalf of our Chief and Council and all of us here today for not only her, but her family and all of you and all those who know her and who she has deeply impacted. And Cook's Gem. Squayu tu amku sknu wins equisalton. Asayut sknu quesen twas. Cookstak to cookalkupi de kakakuk. Yukmeet kwawaita pestem and nilia to tmuch. Yukmeet kalmuch were meskin and spiuch. El salqua el stilens cook. Cookstak cook kwawaita pes cook. Cookstack the cookby, cookstack, cookwaitip, the chilam.
Cook's Jim, thank you.